Okay, I'm going to show how to build a niche. Some people call it an alcove, some people call it a nook. I call it a niche. Anyway, the whole point is I'm building this shower that used to be a tub, and almost always I do a niche. And almost always I do a niche on the back wall. The back wall, just by default, I usually try and do center. The walls are generally center anyway as far as the studding goes, and so that's what you're looking at is the studs here. In this case it's a little different only because I used to have a box here, if you will, that covered nothing. You know, it was just to take up the room of the tub. So the distance between here and the end is exactly the same, which would give me my niche right square in the middle. In this case it won't be, it'll be offset. And so there's different ways you can go about this. Some people kind of freak out. I've had customers freaking out before because I cut out this center stud. When I cut out the center stud, it's so that I can have this niche going across. And they think somehow or another that structurally that will, I don't know, somehow affect the house. And it truly won't. I mean, there's so many studs and stuff going on in this house that, you know, cutting out one area won't affect it at all. But regardless, we're going to shore this back up, and I'll show that a little bit later. Anyway, there are niches that are preformed. The preformed niches are, for lack of a better term, a waterproof box, and they sell those at tile stores. Generally speaking, they're 16-inch on center, which most studs are, and so they actually fit and wrap around the two studs here. You're kind of relegated to what size they are. I believe they're probably 12 by 12 or maybe a little bit smaller, or 12 by 16 rather. I've never really liked those because I don't want to be relegated to my niches. My niches usually are longer, so if you got 16 inches on center, this is 30 inches from this stud to that stud. So I like a long, elongated 30-inch niche, and the reason is because all the shampoo bottles and everything else that you have sitting on top of this shelf is just one long shelf rather than having a short shelf, or in some cases they sell those things prefab that are two different shelves. So there'll be a border in the middle, not a border, but a little shelf in the middle. So there'll be a smaller niche at the bottom, a smaller niche at the top with a shelf in the middle. I don't particularly like those either. That's just my feeling on it. I've done a few before when a customer has asked me to, but as a rule I like the 30-inch niche by 12 inches. And 12 inches by default only because the tallest shampoo bottle I've ever come across is about right at 12 inches. And so I doubt anybody's going to have anything taller than that. So anyway, the tools that you're going to need, and in this case I've already got them set up. You're going to need a circular saw, and mine has a laser on it, and that's kind of important because when you cut along the stud here, you want it to be as straight as possible. Same on the top over here, so that when you do the cutout, your 2x4 is completely level. And I'm going to get into why that is. So the circular saw blade will only cut probably up to about here or so, and then you're kind of stuck with about another inch and a half of 2x4 that you got to cut out. So for that reason, I also use a reciprocating saw. Some people call it a sawzall, but it's a reciprocating saw, and I use a very, very short blade on it, a wood cutting blade, and that's to get off the last little inch and a half. You know, could I use a reciprocating saw to do the whole thing? Yes, I could, but for the purposes of trying to get this line as straight as possible, I know my skill saw is a lot straighter cut than the reciprocating saw would be, so I only use it for the last part. Then the other thing you're going to need is either a nailer with 2.5-inch nails or 3-inch nails. It really doesn't matter. You don't have to use a nailer. You could end up using 3-inch drywall screws, but I'm going to show you exactly why you're going to need those in just a minute. And I have nobody to help me with the videos that I take, so I'm going to go ahead and make this cut. Oh, let me get to the measurement part. So in order to get a 12-inch niche, 17 inches is what I cut out. You see I've already drawn my line here. So this is where I'm going to cut here, this is where I'm going to cut here. And that's exactly 17 inch of this 2x4 that's coming out. When I place a 2x4 horizontally across the top of here, that's going to take an 1.5 inches, and then I do the same thing up here, another 1.5 inches, so that 17 becomes 14. With a 14-inch opening like that, I have another 1/2 inch wall board here, 1/2 inch wall board here, so that's another inch off of the 14, and it becomes 13. Then I have about a 1/4 inch or so of tile and some thin set on both top and bottom. That's going to take up about a 3/4 of an inch, maybe 1/2 inch or so. So what I'll end up with ultimately is either 12 or 12 1/4 to almost 12.5 inch opening on my niche. So that's how the measurement goes. I usually start my cut right around the 4 foot mark, and that's only because I know that my wall board is going to be 4 foot going up, and I'll have a little overhang. But anyway, that's all technical stuff and not really important for this purpose of the video. So I'm going to do my cuts and I'll be back. Okay, I'm back, and the piece that I wanted out, 17-inch piece, is now gone. By the way, this is an exterior wall. Most of my niches are on exterior wall, and some people kind of think maybe it's not a good idea to put a niche on an exterior wall. Not really the case, for a lot of different reasons, the least of which is that once the wall board, see, when I start building the niche, you'll see the wall board is going to encapsulate the whole entire inside of the niche, and then in addition to that we're going to put tile on there. And I am in Atlanta, and although it does get freezing, it doesn't stay at the freezing mark very long. Is this a good idea up north? I don't know. I suppose if you were really worried about it, you could probably put some type of insulation on that back wall and then use the wall board, but then you're going to decrease your shelf of your niche by quite a bit. I've never been too concerned about it. I've never had a call back on anything happening with these niches. Sometimes people want the niche on the shower head wall, in which case, for example here, the reason I have this going out, this is a shower head pipe by the way, but the customer wanted, in this case, the shower head to be on the opposite wall, which is where it's at now, so that's what's going on. So in this case, it's actually a pretty good example. If I were to do a niche right here on this wall, it would be one, kind of small because I'm relegated to the room again. So it would be 16, it would be about 15 inches left to right. And then theoretically I could take your shower head pipe and run it over this direction, and then through this stud and up the wall and back over, and your shower head will actually come out here, so your niche theoretically could go here. On knee walls, say there was a knee wall here, I've had some customers that want their niche on the inside of the knee wall because they don't want somebody to see their stuff. Don't know why. Everybody has stuff, and in this case, when I do them on the back wall, it's really a showpiece. In fact, this customer even said, I want it to look as nice as possible. I'm going to decorate it for the purposes of it being a showpiece, because there's going to be glass here and people are going to see the niche. Anyway, getting back to the cut. So I made the cut of this 2x4, and it's a pretty straight cut on the bottom as well as the top. That's what I'm looking to get. Typically what I run into, these studs are actually serving more of a purpose than just being a wall, but they also attach this board, which is the exterior board, onto these studs. So therefore you're going to have nails. I've got 2, 4, I got 6 nails. So with the same reciprocating saw that I was telling you about before, you put a metal cutting blade on here, and you can get the blade on the edge of the nail and cut them right off. So I've already done that, and that's the easiest way. I guess you could use a hacksaw or maybe a Dremel tool or something, but those nails definitely have to come out. So the next step is you measure from left to right. In this case I have 30.5 inches. So I've already pre-cut my boards that are going to go in here. I'm going to try and do this with one hand. So that's the bottom board. Then the top board, same again, already pre-cut. It's also a pretty good idea to make your boards a little longer than the actual measurement so that you can get as tight a fit as possible. Which is what I've done. So, even on one-handed, board ain't going nowhere. Very tight fit. And there you have it. That's basically how you build a niche. It's really that simple. I mean, there's other stuff going on about that, but let me show you also. So on the inside, you want to take a tape measure and make sure I have 14 and almost a quarter. 14 and an eighth. Okay, so the other side should also be 14 and an eighth, and I'm at 14 right now. So to get my eighth, I'm just gonna knock this down just a little bit. Knock that up. Redo a measurement. I'm still at 14 and an eighth, and I'm a little off still. So let me see if I can get rid of that eighth. So don't want to bore you with all this measurement taking, but it's important to know how to get this. So I have 14 and an eighth on both left and right side. That's one part of the equation. Next part is to put a level on it, because you want to make sure that you're level going across the top and the bottom. In this case, I'm just a little shy of being center. So again, a little adjustment goes a long way. Okay, so I'm right at level with that one. And actually, what I said earlier about taking the measurement, this is probably the first step you want to take, because all things being equal, it should be the same measurement after both top and bottom are level. That is really, really close. I'm going to take a measurement, see how that works out. So I'm at exactly 14 inches. And over here, I'm exactly 14 inches. So, as I said, if you do the leveling part about it first, you know, both on top and bottom board, you're going to have a really, really, really good idea of how level those are, assuming that, you know, you cut your board in the center correctly. Both top and bottom should level out, and therefore the measurements left to right should also come out. So, moving along, sorry it took so long to explain that. Moving along, I take my nail gun, and I'm going to have to do this without the video rolling, but basically I take my nail gun and I nail into the end of both boards, into both boards on the top, and then a couple nails right in the center of that stud, a couple nails in that stud. And so I will be... Okay, everything is nailed in, as you see. A couple nails in the center of that stud, same as the stud, and the same as the top. I toe nailed in on these, on the inside of it, and then on the outside of the stud, through a nail inside there, both top and bottom over there, so it's very, very secure. And then I redid the measurement as well to make sure my 14 inches is still intact on both ends. And that's basically how a niche is built. 30 by 12. It'll eventually be about 29, well, it's 30 and a half now. It'll be about 29 and a half by 12 exactly, 12 and a half, 12 and a quarter or so, roughly. So the next process is, once I put all the wallboard on, you'll see the process of me putting, or at least I'll show you afterward, that the wallboard is all put on here. So on this back wall here, whatever wallboard you use, this back wall I do an exact measurement, and then I use my caulking gun, and it doesn't matter, silicone or liquid nails or whatever that you use, and I run a bunch of caulking on that board on the back of it as well as the back of this wall, and then I actually inset that piece of board on the inside so that it's stuck to that wall. Then the rest of my strips go around it, kind of pushing it in as it dries, and that's how that is, because you can't really screw into that back wall. And so that's how I do that, just in case you want to know, because I'm going to show you the final result of that as I move along, showing you how to build a niche. Okay, it's a couple days later. Yeah, 2 days later. I've already poured the shower pan and prepped all the walls with my backer board, and I am ready to continue on the process of building this niche. So the only thing I've done since I was away before, as you saw me put in all the studding for the niche, the only thing I've done is put on the board at this point. And the cutout that you do on here, what kind of board really doesn't matter, but the cutout is usually a good template for exactly what you need on the back wall. So you remember, this is an exterior wall. So what I've done is I've used that piece, and I have silicone caulking. In this case it's just almond, because that's what I had in the truck that was handy. So I've just dabbed a whole bunch of this stuff on here because, as I said before, you can't screw or nail into this exterior wall, so the only way to set this in place permanently is to do this. So process is pretty easy. This fits like a glove right inside of there. You push it back. There's not a lot of movement on it, but you're still going to push it back and make sure there's good adhesion with all that caulking. When I do showers, I always RedGard, and one of the reasons, you know, I hope nobody ever makes a comment on here about, oh, you're using green board. Well, because I use RedGard, and I used at least 2 coats, sometimes 3 on this board. So other videos you'll see the reasoning and logic why I'm not a fan of using Hardy backer and Durarock and all that stuff on my shower, because it doesn't matter what your backer is, it matters what your prep is. You could use RedGard, you could use AquaGuard, you could use dense board, which is basically gypsum anyway, and that just has a coating of waterproofing, so it's the same thing as I'm doing here. Or you could use the Curtis Schluter, in which case, again, doesn't really matter what your backer is. So that's the reason I'm using the green board, if anybody wants to know. And so because I'm using RedGard, and I paint inside the corners when I'm finished with this, you're going to see I'm going to paint inside the corners really well. My niche, even though it doesn't get as wet as some people think it does, I'm always adherent to painting on the inside of this niche at least 3 times. So even this back piece, which is, you know, all one piece, will still get 3 coats of RedGard when I'm done. And because of that, I don't go crazy with redundancy on top of redundancy on top of redundancy. But if you wanted to, what you simply do, use caulking, and you can caulk all these cracks that you see inside here where your backer board meets. Again, it's a redundancy that I don't really see the point of. My boards that are going to go on the bottom and top are already pre-cut, so that's going to go inside there. Top one's going to go inside the top. And then I have one last board that I'm going to use to cut off on the side. So the top and bottom always goes first, for me anyway. I like that. I like the idea of having a shorter board on the edge. And then when you're done putting this board up, again, you know, if you're comfortable and you want to do it, you can run a bead of caulking along all the seams inside of here, just to make sure no water penetrates. But again, if you're doing your prep right, no water should penetrate anyway. So it's a little safety policy that you could do. Silicone caulking is probably the best. A little harder to work with because, you know, it's hard to get off without some type of WD-40 or something like that. This is just acrylic latex caulk, and it would do the same thing that you're trying to accomplish here, just waterproof the inside. Okay, the niche is ready to go with all the caulking and with all the mudding and everything. The next step is, of course, to RedGard it, so that will be tomorrow. Everything gets RedGarded, especially the corners. I pay attention to those most. That gets at least 3 coats, and then a couple of coats on this back wall. And then that is basically the process. I will show, after I've tiled it, There's going to be a little design on the center, but after I've tiled it, I will also show that process. And not to be redundant, but when I tile it, I will also explain that this tile gets slanted downward so that any water that comes in on it wants to roll off. So that's important also. But that's the process of building a niche, and it's, as I said, fairly easy to do, and you can make them your own size. I could have made this much longer, almost from wall to wall if I wanted to. I could make them vertical, which I don't really get into, but if you made them vertical, imagine you would have a shelf in the middle here. So anyway, that's basically the process, and I will be back when I have RedGarded the entire thing. Okay, the final process of building the niche is finished. So basically what you've seen in this video is that the studs were cut out, or I'm sorry, the one stud was cut out here in the center, and then fashioned out the bottom and the top to make the rectangle that you see now. The next step was putting the wallboard, wrapping the wallboard around it. The back one was glued, just a little recap, and then of course all the inside was put in. Of course the caulking was done in the corners, and all the different mudding and stuff was done as well surrounding the niche. Now the next process, of course, would be the RedGard. The RedGard is a waterproofer, so there's 2 coats at least that went in here. You see the corners, my camera's not too good on red I guess, but you see the corners get a lot of RedGard, and it dries, you know, to like a rubber type consistency. So all the corners and the edges in here got painted really well. The back wall here got 2 coats, I think either 2 coats or 3 coats of the RedGard. So in essence, if any water should ever get through the grout, because it can't get through the tile, but if any water ever gets through the grout, it's going to hit this barrier, this RedGard, and no moisture will ever penetrate these walls. Not in the corners, not nowhere. So theoretically, let's say whatever reason water gets into my grout lines, and of course my tile is going to be set at an angle, so it really never really should, but if water gets into the grout lines and gets down here, the worst case scenario is the water will sit there stagnant. You might get some mold and mildew, but will never ever penetrate through here, and that's the whole purpose of having the RedGard. So right now I have thin set on there because I have a design I'm going to be putting in the center, and the design goes first. Once that's done, then I will continue with the bull nose. The bull nose will get wrapped around, I'm sorry, once the design is done, then of course the inside, what I call caps, the cap pieces get put on the inside, and then the bull nose goes on first. That gets set first because as I start working my way up with the tile, it's going to wrap around where the bull nose are at. And that's the process, and so I will show the final result of this niche once I've tiled it, and I am going to get started. And this is a finished niche with all the tile and the grouting done already. And that's how easy it is to build a niche of your own size. As I said before, this niche theoretically could have been all the way to the corner of that wall, almost to the corner, all the way to the corner of that wall if I wanted to. It can make it as tall as I want also. It doesn't have to be 12 inches, it could be 16 or 20 or whatever, and it could still have a middle shelf. It could be split up all different ways you want to. But anyway, that's the final product. It's nice and sealed behind everything, even if water ever should get through the grout lines, which is very doubtful, but if it does, it's going to hit RedGard first, and you know, it won't matter. It'll eventually come out of the grout line the same as it came in. But you're going to seal everything as well, and run a bead of caulking on the inside of here as well. So, you know, that's kind of what I always push is, well, the caulking thing I'm not really into in the corners of the wall unless there's cracking going on. Say 6 months or a year from now there's some cracking between the tile, then I'm not a big advocate of caulking, because if you do that then you'll always have to caulk, and re-caulking means taking out the old caulking. So it's not silicone that I would use in there anyway, it is latex caulking if I were to do that at all. And the same as here, they have a bone color that would match this tile and grout very well. That's a finished niche. So, you know, of course I framed it out with the bull nose. This niche bottom here slopes at an angle, so if water hits the backsplash, hits the back of that, it'll just fall down and roll off and back into the shower. So that's it. That's how to build a niche. Pretty simple, easy thing to do, and that's all I have to say about niches. There's not too much to say. The design features, you know, are, wow, there's quadrillion different design features. This one the customer came up with, but sometimes you can just put this tile in the back. You can do a mosaic. You can do the same field tile just straight. You know, you can do just about anything you want back there. One time I put, I cut a seashell into about a 1/4 inch sliver and actually used a seashell right in the center there. But that's it. That's how to build a niche.